At this time, I'd like to bring up our next speaker. Some of you know her very well. In 2002, Sheriff Andrea J. Cabral became the first female county sheriff in the Commonwealth's history. She comes with over 25 years of public service experience and extensive background in administrative issues, family and domestic violence, torts, and civil rights. She's published a couple of books, co-authored a number of works. She serves on the boards of the Mass Mentoring Partnership and the Boston History and Innovation Collaboration. Sheriff Cabral has received numerous awards and honors throughout her career. Please help me welcome our very own Sheriff Andrea Cabral.
Good afternoon. Well, I always start off with, when I think about what it is I'm going to say, I always start off with what I'm asked to say, and then sometimes that becomes something else. It kind of depends on how I'm feeling and the view of the world I'm taking at any given time. So this is what I ended up with. And by the way, it is an absolute pleasure to be here today at the invitation of the Women's Pipeline for Change. Thank you for having me. And it's also, kind of funny that we know that all politics is local, but to the point that Tiffany made and that Suzanne and Cheryl have been making, all politics may be local, but the people that get elected at the local level become the people who go to Congress and make laws that change your life with the stroke of a pen. And that, in some ways, drove me to jot down a few things to say to you today. I don't know if many of you saw, it was very well done, many of you saw the HBO miniseries John Adams. And there's a scene in that where Abigail Adams is there with her daughter, and they're sort of tilling the soil. And I think her daughter's older brother is going off to do something. And at one point she looks up at her mother and says, "Why are the boys always allowed to have all the fun?" And Abigail responds, "Because we let them." Goes directly to Tiffany's point. It's a point well taken. Nobody can take from you what you don't allow to be taken. Women are the majority in this country. A person cannot get, oh, and by the way, I'm sorry. I just kind of changed my mind about what to say, so I know you're the timekeeper, but I cannot, since I didn't time it, I can't promise you that I'm going to be done in 8 minutes. I'm really sorry. The stream of consciousness thing just completely overtakes me at some point. A person cannot get elected president of these United States without a majority of support from women. And though we are hardly homogenous as a voting bloc, the distance between our numbers in the population and the degree of economic and political power we hold at the state and national level is far, far too great. To my memory and knowledge of history, 2012 represents the worst and most challenging time for women in the history of this country since the suffrage movement. There is a level of extremism in politics today that has a laser-like focus on the control of women, their voices, their choices, their health care, and their rights. There have been 740 separate pieces of legislation filed in states across this country related to restricting women's access to health care, contraception, and abortion. I can provide no worse example of those laws than the following, courtesy of the Republican-controlled Virginia state legislature, which passed a bill that would force women, or that does force women, who are seeking abortions to undergo an ultrasound. Originally, the bill required a transvaginal ultrasound. That requires the use of a probe. It's not a medically necessary procedure. Under the bill, the patient has no right to refuse it, and her doctor cannot refuse to perform it, even if it would cause emotional pain or physical damage. And therein lies the real purpose of the bill. The purpose of this bill is to control a woman's exercise of her constitutional rights by inflicting shame, humiliation, and economic hardship. In all of the bills that I'm about to describe to you, the woman bears the cost of the ultrasound. It's not covered. So you have to pay for this to happen to you. Clearly the choice, and I use invisible quotation marks, is pay the price or change your mind. Virginia's state motto, this is a real irony, is Sic Semper Tyrannis, which is Latin for thus always to tyrants, which used to be a rallying cry for the abuse of power by those who control government. A vote on the Virginia bill was postponed after more than 1,000 women and men lined the walkway to the State House and stood in silent confrontation as every legislator passed. Under intense pressure, Governor Bob McDonnell backed off his earlier intention to sign the legislation as it was, and ultimately signed the bill, but they just changed the nature of the ultrasound. You still have to have one. Doctors still can't refuse to perform it. It's just not the invasive kind. By the way, Virginia is not an outlier on laws like this. According to the Guttmacher Institute, 20 states have similar or the same laws in effect. Texas actually mandates that the doctor describe the image on the ultrasound to the patient. North Carolina and Oklahoma would also like to force doctors to do this, but their laws have been challenged and they're unenforceable. Right now, pending action by the court. Among some of the other legislation-related things that have been happening in this country, with 3 notable exceptions, every Republican in Congress and 5 Democrats voted against the Lilly Ledbetter Act, which guarantees women equal pay for equal work and was the first piece of legislation signed into law by President Obama. Over the past 8 years, in order to sustain an inexplicable system of gross tax underpayment for the wealthiest 5% in this country, funding for human and social services that comprise the so-called safety net, on which the country's poor rely on for their very survival, have been gutted. The majority of poor in this country are women, and especially women of color. The Affordable Health Care Act, which would overwhelmingly benefit women from college age to seniors, is under strenuous challenge in the United States Supreme Court, whose decision, sadly, according to a recent poll, will be seen by a majority of Americans as being driven by political ideology and not the law and the facts. Here's a quote from Secretary of State Hillary Clinton on March 15th at the 2012 Women in the World Summit. She said, "Why extremists always focus on women remains a mystery to me, but they all seem to. It doesn't matter what country they're in or what religion they claim, they all want to control women. They want to control how we dress, they want to control how we act. They even want to control the decisions that we make about our own health and our own bodies. Yes, it's hard to believe, but even here at home, we have to stand up for women's rights and reject efforts to marginalize any one of us, because America needs to set an example for the entire world." All of this is not happening by accident. It's happening because our voices aren't in the places they need to be to keep it from happening. It is appropriate and can be very effective to rally and protest publicly those laws or policies we feel discriminate against us or deprive us of our civil rights. We must always vote and always use our votes to stake our claim in the economic, social, and political future of this country. We should absolutely use the power of the boycott and social media to demand that the misogyny and sexism that so pervades talk radio be unsupported by advertisers who want and need our business. But as long as women, and especially women of color, remain the exception among those elected to office, equal consideration of their interests in Congress and every state legislature will never be the rule. Political power is indispensable to economic power, even if that power is used, especially if that power is used to level the playing field for women. There's a reason I carry a fan. Well, between the topics I choose and then this stage of life, I'm always hot. It's unavoidable. Either mad or menopausal. I know exactly how this works. trial detainees. They had less access to programs and even certain privileges routinely enjoyed by their male counterparts. Because I am a woman, my approach to their incarceration was different from any other sheriff before me because no other sheriff before me had been a woman. One woman in a position of power can change an entire system on behalf of all women. But first I had to run, and second, I had to get elected. And there are a number of you in this room, I see many of you, at all different tables as a matter of fact, who made sure that happened. And if I haven't been in a room giving a speech before where I said thank you, thank you. Cheryl, Pretty Before Pretty, Sheila Capone Wilson, my buddy in the back there, when I see you every place. You have been, no, and you're a perfect example of why the Women Pipeline for Change has to exist. And this is why I support it. I hope it quickly becomes a national organization. Well, I'm not too much about me, oh, okay. I really do hope that it quickly becomes a national organization. I know that it has the right women for the job. What I like about the WPC is that it knows that we don't have the luxury of time, and it stands ready to build the kind of strong coalitions we need to support the election of women of color. Once again, what's past is prologue. Women's voices suppressed in one place will rise thunderously in another. The Women's Pipeline for Change is raising its voice and fighting back. We must support them with our money, our time, and our energy. And most importantly, with our votes and financial support for the candidates they train and support. It's that we all, it's time that we all, each and every one of us, resurrect another famous rallying cry, the one that started it all. Don't tread on me. I hope you enjoyed your afternoon at the conference. It was a pleasure to be here. Go Women's Pipeline for Change.